I'm going to explore with you today, hopefully we can explore together, 5 questions about happiness that I believe have real implications for our communities, for our workplaces, and for us as individuals. So we might as well start with the big questions. We'll start with the big questions. So, what do you want from your life? I mean, really, if you had to choose one thing above everything else, what do you want from your life? Or if you're a parent, maybe think about sort of ultimately, what do you hope for your kids? Now, if I ask that question to most people, the answer I normally get is, well, I want to be happy, or I want them to be happy. And if I said to you, well, what does that mean? Does that mean a life full of pleasure and fun and all that stuff? And my guess is you'd probably say, well, that's part of it. But actually, it's about something more. It's about maybe a sense of fulfillment, a sense of being the best of who I am. And that's a question really, and like many people, it's a question that's guided my life. I came from a working class London family, and I knew from a really young age that I wanted to go to university. No one in my extended family had ever been to college. So, and I got to university and I studied psychology and zoology and I loved it. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I didn't know what I wanted to be. I thought, I'll get a good grounding in business. So I applied for a variety of jobs, and I got this one that said International Executive Tax Consultancy, and I thought, whoa, that sounds great. That sounds really great. So I found myself training to be an accountant, which kind of wasn't really me. And halfway through my training, it was quite a tough training, lots of exams at my time, I just realized that, I could sort of do it intellectually, but it wasn't using my strengths, and it was sort of starting to sap my soul. So I stayed on, I qualified, not too much blood, but quite a lot of sweat and quite a lot of tears, and I got through. But I thought, there's no way I want to do this. What I'm really interested in, what I really like, is the people side of business. The people side of business. So through my succession of career moves, then I gradually honed that down to what really interested me. So I left accounting and moved into human resources. My accounting friends thought I was nuts. I managed the pay and bonus pool of an investment bank for a time. I worked for a big consultancy designing fancy people management systems. And I gradually developed a specialism in this thing called talent management, which lots of big organizations use. And it's really about identifying potential in people and developing that. But what it really, and that's what I'm really interested in, but what it really means in many big organizations, and certainly did when I was there doing the role, it meant really identifying our top 10 to 15% of the people for our talent pool. And this started to niggle away with me, because I was thinking, if only 15% of your organization is talent, does that mean the bottom 85% are talent less? And that can't be right. And surely if we can release just a little bit of the talent of that bottom 85%, it's going to be better for them and better for the organization. And this question was really starting to niggle away at me, because I was only good living, but it was just really starting to eat away at me, and I was much more interested in the bottom 85%. I was at a conference, an HR conference, and somebody started to talk about strengths. Why don't we develop strengths instead of correcting weaknesses? And they talked about this new area of psychology called positive psychology. And I just had this light bulb moment. I'm not sitting where you are now, and a light bulb moment. And I just thought, this has to be part of the future. And I want it to be part of my future. So reel forward about 9 months, I find myself taking a sabbatical on a plane, going to the States to study this stuff, this thing called positive psychology. By now, my accounting friends thought I was really nuts. So what is positive psychology? Well, positive psychology is just psychology. It's the same scientific methods. So it gets very confused with things like positive thinking. It's not. It's the same scientific methods. But psychology traditionally, historically, for very good reason, had focused on the causes and cures of psychological dysfunction. But positive psychology looks at the upside, really. So instead of saying, why do we go from 0 to -5 and back to 0 again? It says, well, actually, not being ill is not the same as feeling good, functioning well, or flourishing, or being happy. And why does that stuff actually matter? Does it matter? So that brings us to the next question. Does happiness matter? Well, from an individual perspective, we know that individuals with higher psychological well-being, individuals who are happier, are more likely to be physically healthy. They're less likely to catch a cold. They're at lower risk of heart disease. They're more likely to take care of their health. At work, they're likely to be more creative and productive. They're more likely to be engaged. Some studies show they even are likely to earn more. So there are some significant individual benefits of happiness, and the research on this is growing. But that brings us to this third question. Is focusing on our own happiness selfish? Maybe not, because other studies are showing that maybe if we're happier, we'll be better citizens. Certainly, people who have higher psychological well-being are more likely to vote. They're less likely to engage in dangerous behaviours on the road. They're more likely to take care of their finances, be financially responsible. They're more likely to help other people. Organisations that pay attention to the happiness of their employees have been shown to outperform the stock market average over a 26-year period. Pretty interesting study. So maybe focusing on our own happiness isn't just selfish. And there's even evidence to show that our happiness is catching. This study is done by Christakis and Fowler, and they looked at the ripple effect of individual happiness through social networks, real social networks. And they found that an individual's happiness has an impact not just on the people they're in direct contact with, but the people they're in direct contact with and the people they're in direct contact with. Statistically significant to up to 3 degrees of separation. So just how happy I am is having an impact on people I've never seen. And they're having an impact on me. So maybe focusing on our own happiness is not a selfish thing. Maybe it's actually a responsibility that we all have. Which then begs the question, does this mean we should be bouncing around full of joy and glee all the time? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Of course, when we're unhappy, it's telling us something. Life is full of ups and downs, and being unhappy is an appropriate response to many of those downs. And as Albert Ellis, the father of cognitive behavioral therapy, said, we're remarkably good at disturbing ourselves. And indeed, Aristotle said, to be angry is easy. To be angry with the right person at the right time, to the right extent and in the right way, is no longer something that's easy to do. So how do we be happier? How do we become happier? Final question. Of course, there are lots of determinants on our happiness, lots of different factors at play. Our genes and early upbringing absolutely play an environment, but it's kind of hard to change your parents. Our circumstances, of course, play a role, to a lesser or greater extent, depending on how good or bad those are. But for all of us, a significant proportion of how we feel in our lives is down to what we do and how we think. And it's this do piece that I really want to focus on, because a fundamental ingredient, if you like, for human psychological well-being is a sense of agency and a sense of control. So almost by taking any action, even a small action, starts to fuel our well-being. And by taking a small action, that can propel us to take greater action for ourselves and for other people. So what are the sorts of things we can do? Well, at Action for Happiness, we've tried to synthesize a lot of the evidence into the main areas we can take action for ourselves and for other people. We call them our 10 keys to happier living for individuals. The first 5 are things that we tend to do in the outside world that affect how we are on the inside world, and they build on some fantastic work that New Economics Foundation did on the 5 ways to wellbeing. And in addition to those things that we do in the outside world, there are 5 that affect how we are on our inside world, how we are on the inside world, and how that affects how we are outside. And it's a menu, not a prescription, because different things work for different people at different times. And clearly, in the time we have available, I can't go through all 10. So I thought I'd focus on what perhaps are the 2 most important ones, and they're first on the list there, giving and relating. As human beings, we are social creatures. We've evolved to live in social groups. So it follows that our connections and interactions with others have a fundamental effect on our well-being. And in fact, when we have lack of social support, that poses as big a threat to our physical health and our psychological health and our mortality as smoking or obesity. Some studies suggest it has an even greater impact. And we know, how in our organisations, our interactions, our relationships with our colleagues and co-workers are also really important. And people who have good relationships with their colleagues are more likely to be engaged in their jobs and more committed to their organisations. And perhaps the most important person at work is our immediate manager or supervisor. But Danny Kahneman's work shows that our least happy time of day is time spent with our boss, which is quite scary if you're a boss. Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development data in the UK shows that one of the biggest contributory factors to long-term sickness absence due to stress is management style. So people can make a big difference to how we feel. But there's really good news. Because small things, in terms of building our connections, whether at home or at work, can really make a difference. How does it feel when somebody notices something you've done and says, "Thanks, thank you"? How does it feel when somebody listens to your ideas, really listens? And how does it feel when somebody takes a genuine interest in something you're interested in? These small things over time build up to make a difference. Jane Dutton's work at the University of Michigan has studied these small positive interactions between people, as little as 6 seconds. And her work shows that over time they build up to positively impact individuals' psychological health and their physical health and their functioning. And that then has a ripple effect out to the organizations they're in, organization effectiveness, and organization performance. So small things can make a big difference. And one of the pathways to these high-quality connections, as she calls them, is helping other people, which takes us to giving. And many of you will know that there is a kind of there's a real kind of interesting interaction between happiness and helping other people. Because when we help someone else, it isn't just good for them, hopefully, but it's good for us too. It literally activates the reward centers in our brains. Helping makes us happier. And there's an interesting research that shows that when we're happier, we help other people more. So it's kind of like this virtuous circle. Helping makes us happier people help more. So it's interesting. Even in organizations, this is showing to be the case. Adam Grant at Wharton Business School has done a lot of studies showing that helping behaviors in organizations, contrary to what we might think, can lead to long-term individual success and long-term organizational success. So if you take one thing away really from the talk today, I hope that you take away that your happiness and my happiness is interconnected. My happiness matters for you, but I can't be happy unless I care about you. And it's actually a lot about what we do. Thank you.